Imagine a chaotic situation where people are trying to stay safe during an armed conflict. The fundamental principle is that civilians are protected, but what happens when a civilian actively joins the fighting? When a civilian directly participates in hostilities, they temporarily lose their protection from attack under international humanitarian law. This means they can be targeted by opposing forces for the duration of their involvement. The core reason for this rule lies in the principle of distinction, a cornerstone of international humanitarian law. This principle requires parties to an armed conflict to always distinguish between civilians and combatants, and between civilian objects and military objectives. Civilians, by definition, do not take a direct part in hostilities, and therefore must not be the object of attack. However, engaging in direct participation blurs this line. Direct participation in hostilities refers to acts that, by their nature or purpose, are intended to cause actual harm to the enemy's personnel and material. These acts must have a direct causal link between the act and the harm inflicted, and they must be specifically designed to support one party to the conflict and negatively affect another. The key is that these acts are typically military in nature, like firing a weapon, gathering intelligence for an attack, or operating a weapons system. This temporary change in status is not about their permanent identity as a civilian but about their specific actions during the conflict. Once they stop these activities, their civilian protection is immediately reinstated. Understanding when an act constitutes direct participation requires careful assessment based on objective criteria. It is not enough to simply support one side politically or economically. The actions must be directly and causally linked to harming the enemy's military operations or personnel. For an individual, this means refraining from any activities that could be considered military action. If someone ceases their direct participation, such as laying down their arms or no longer engaging in hostile acts, they must be treated as a civilian again and cannot be targeted. This area of international humanitarian law can be complex, and a key resource that helps clarify these concepts is the International Committee of the Red Cross, often called the ICRC, Interpretive Guidance on Direct Participation in Hostilities. This guidance helps states and military forces apply the rules consistently, ensuring that the critical distinction between civilians and combatants is maintained even in challenging circumstances. It underscores that remaining a civilian, fully separated from military action, is the best way to retain protection. Understanding how direct participation affects civilian protection is essential for upholding the fundamental protections afforded by international humanitarian law. It clarifies the boundaries between civilian life and military action, ensuring that those who choose not to fight are shielded from the dangers of armed conflict, while those who engage in hostilities understand the consequences of their actions under the law. This knowledge helps reinforce the vital framework that seeks to minimize suffering during times of war.